as those of you who have followed the Future Insight lectures and seminars that I've done, one of the things I like to do is to sort of start at the beginning and talk to people about where they came from. I was joking with Tory in that neither he or I were born as CEOs. We started and worked our way up. Started in classrooms like this, in places like you did. And my first job was working for Kentucky Fried Chicken, cooking 500 pounds of chicken a day. So it's important to see that, because all of you are now some part in your career, but you're all looking at what you want to do, how you want to go there. And we're going to talk about how Tory got to where he is, but also we're going to talk a little bit about not only ULA and Vulcan, but what he sees for the future of launch and future of space. Because that's what I think is so much important for what you're doing. Where would you go? I'm a pilot, I look at where I'm flying, not where I was. And as students, as people coming out of this university with this education, what do you do? Where do you go? What kind of research? What's important? And what I did in my career, starting a couple of decades ago, is not what I would do today. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about as well. So Tory, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I start with fried chicken, though,
yes,
I brought something for you and for the department.
Oh.
So here it is. I've been warned not to leave that around because you guys might put rocket motors in it.
So that was my warning. But you guys did not put anything explosive in this.
I also have something just for you.
Thank you.
That's a launch coin. You can't buy those. You can on any day, but it doesn't matter if you do. They can only be given to people who were helpful along the way.
Thank you, my friend. And these things, those of you who don't know the long history in the military and in the space industry of what's called challenge coins, launch coins, are really a special thing, because they're provided from one friend to another. I've provided them to people that I've worked with, and many of us who have had these over our career keep them and put them and display them, because it really is a special moment. So thank you very much. Now, did this fly?
No, but there's a chip on the front from the booster that flew. We saved them. We saved a barrel full, and that one is stuck on there just for you.
Oh, wow. I'm floored. Thank you very much. Even more happy that it flew. Sorry, so take us back to the beginning. I mean, tell us a little bit about how you grew up, and when did you get that spark to decide that you wanted to follow a path into aerospace?
Well, I grew up on a working cattle ranch, and so couldn't be much further from space than that. But I'm just
Although there is some methane involved. I think we're doing that now, right?
Yes, we are. I watched The First Man on the Moon. I don't mean the movie, I mean live. I'm just old enough to have done that, and that's when I really got interested in space. I thought that was just absolutely amazing. I knew I wanted to go into rocketry from that point forward, but you don't go to CEO school and hire in as a CEO, as Mark said. I obviously worked on the ranch, but ranching doesn't pay much. If any of you are from our rural community here in Colorado, you probably know that. I've had all kinds of jobs. I've been a commercial fisherman, I've been a lumberjack, you name it, I've done that kind of stuff. I put myself through college, went down to Cal Poly, and started working for Lockheed back when it was Lockheed, not Lockheed Martin yet. And pretty much been doing rockets my whole life. I didn't have any interest, in fact, in management at all. I just wanted to be a rocket scientist. That's what I did for the first 10 years. I made that switch kind of reluctantly, because I finally realized, well, I could probably have a bigger impact. And so I kind of did it. It has always been important to me that what we do matters. And missions that we serve, that I served then, that I still serve now, are what motivates me. And so that is what allowed me to make that transition. I have worked on a lot of programs. In our industry, if you've worked on 2 or 3 different systems, that's a lot. I've probably worked on 40 or more. I've done about 36 first launches. That's very rare. You're lucky to do a couple of those. So I've had a really broad background, and it's probably largely due to partly luck, being in a place where there were a lot of different things to work on, but also because early on I wanted to make that difference, and I wasn't smart enough to know that you run away from a program that's in trouble. I always thought you should volunteer to help if you thought you could. And once you've done that a couple of times, then you just, you get tagged. When there's a program in trouble or a project in trouble, you are asked to go help. And so by doing that, you get to work on a lot of different things.
What was your first launch experience?
My first launch
when you watched it for the first time?
What was it like?
Yeah, tell us about it.
Oh, it was scary as hell. So it was a ballistic missile, intercontinental class. I had worked on it as a designer, and there's a lot of challenges that happened in that time frame. And this was during the Cold War. We were in a big hurry, and it mattered a lot, and everybody was scared about what would happen if these systems didn't do their job, which was to deter people from doing the unthinkable. And I felt personally responsible for the piece that I had designed, and was not entirely confident that it was going to work, because it takes a little bit of experience to balance those risks. There's no such thing as a zero-risk rocket launch or spacecraft flight. Can't be done. The only way to do that is stay on the ground. And so when you're doing your first ones, you're either arrogant enough to think you can't fail, or you're smart enough to know that more than a little bit of luck is involved.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to talk about that moment, because it is that gut check moment when you realize that some piece of what you've done is on that rocket or that missile, and if it doesn't work, there's going to be a lot of problems, right?
Oh yeah.
From my perspective, when I did my first one, I realized, and I've done that through my 300 different missions I've been on, that I don't actually believe I was successful till the morning after the launch, because then I wake up and I realize I wasn't dreaming, and it actually did happen, and I could read about it. And it's a feeling I think we all get, that it's one of those moments that you really, even though you want to jump up and down and say it's successful, you're waiting to make sure that nothing was wrong along that whole launch profile.
Yeah. And there's nothing like it. These big systems that are complicated, maybe you're pushing technology at the time, and you just pour your heart and soul into it. So does everybody you work with. You work monster hours at the end of the development cycle, and it all comes to that moment. It's either gonna be successful or it's gonna be a catastrophic failure. And when it flies, and it flies well, there's no feeling like that in the world. Nothing like it.
So you spent much of your career, as you said, taking on really challenging projects and working on trying to make them work. And you became somewhat of an expert in that, would you say?
Yeah.
Or at least somebody they called, like, is it like break glass, bring Tory out when there's a problem?
A little bit,
Yeah.
So you always have a day job. So I always had a day job, whatever it was. Problem investigation and redesigns, corrective action, it's its own thing. It's its own set of skills. And I sort of developed a process for it. I had a cadre of preferred teammates and experts depending on what it was. And so I'd get tagged, go fix that, and then I would go recruit from my little black book of people that I love to work with who were brilliant, because you're never doing this stuff by yourself. And in our world, you get to work with some of the most brilliant, smart people that you'll ever meet, and that in itself is rewarding and privilege. So I'd pull those people in, and we'd go solve whatever it was. Later in management, it was a little bit different, because I would generally be given a group or a department or a division or a company that was broken to go fix that. And so the day job finally intersected with the special assignment thing.
I think for all of you, what Tory just said is really important, and what we all learn as we go through this industry is that it's really small, and that you wind up meeting people all along the way. We've met on 3 or 4 different occasions in different parts of our lives and worked with each other. And as you get into your career, it's really important that you realize that when you do this, you treat people well, you work with people. As Tory said, you wind up doing really well. You get into somebody's black book of who to call when you need to need to do something really important or really special. And that list and that group stays with you throughout your whole career. And this industry is one of those things, as I said, people come in for a year or two, and if they don't like it, they get out. But if you stay more than 2 years, you're in it for life, usually. And you wind up spending your time meeting all sorts of people in all sorts of ways. You may change companies, you may get promoted, you may get asked to do different jobs, but you wind up creating a group of friends and a group of people that will stay with you and you will call on. And eventually, all of you will be in the senior leadership roles someday, and you're gonna look around at this room and say, this person's in this company, this person's in this company, we went to school together, we knew each other, we worked on these projects. And it's really important that you understand that, because this is an industry, a lot of industries, people come and go. This is not one of those industries. Most people stay, they make long-term careers, and as you and I have, to really, because we love it. It's challenging, it scares the hell out of us sometimes, but it is in that success when we see something actually go to space, or go to Mars, or go somewhere else, that really makes a difference, and people wind up staying, they change a lot. And it's really important that you really realize that as you go along your career and you make friends, you keep relationships, you build up relationships, and sometimes you call people and say, come up to CU because we want you to speak. And they say yes automatically, because that's how these relationships work. And I would do the same thing for my friend here too. So you were moving along in Lockheed,
Yep.
getting every dirty job that you needed to do. What was your favorite program during that early part of your career?
Favorite program?
Not necessarily mean best program, I mean one that you really enjoyed.
Well, I will say that I had a long stint as chief engineer in the Missile Systems Division. By long, I mean 2 whole years. Loved that job. That was my career goal, my end of career goal. And sadly, I got a little bit too early and wasn't allowed to stay in it. But when I look back, which is different than when you're in the moment, I think the one I look most fondly back on is was a hypersonic program. So you hear a lot about hypersonics now. That was a technology that was worked on really hard at one time, and then was set down to go prosecute global war on terror. And now we're being forced to kind of pick it up and try and get where we were. This particular program involved just a tiny little group of scientists in our laboratory in Palo Alto, and it was that kind of thing. I got onto it the way we talked about. I was at home in like a, I don't know, Thursday evening, phone rings, it's my boss's boss's boss, and he says, hey, you know about that thing, the moving mass program? And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, they just set fire to the last test article, and they don't have any more hardware, and we owe our customer a flight article in like 4 months. Can you go up there and see if you can help them get it square? And so I did. I get up, I showed up at the laboratory at 5:30 in the morning. That was my first mistake. On about 10 o'clock, the scientists came drifting in, and we went into the lab, and sure enough, it was just this. It was a space not even half the size of this room, and it had a little centrifuge in it. It had another workstation. Everything happened in there. We built all the mechanical stuff, all the harnesses, the computers, the whole 9 yards. And sitting in the corner was this big charred area with this giant melted hunk of plastic and aluminum where this thing had shorted out, put about 90 amps through a flight article for about 5 minutes until there was nothing left. And I had this whole plan, when I went up there. That in itself took me daunting. I thought, well, I'm going to sweep up to the lab, and this is a big important thing. I don't know if I should tell you what it was for. Maybe I will. I'll tell you what it was for. There was this guy at this time running Libya named Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. He was a bad man. He blew up a 747 over Lockerbie and killed a bunch of people. He blew up a Marine barracks. He helped some guys set fire and kill a bunch of people in a discotheque in Germany. And our government decided they had enough of his bullshit and they were going to kill him. And he was off hiding in the desert. And he knew how long it took for us to find him and organize an airstrike and be on him, and he would move inside that time limit. And so what was asked for was a system that could be anywhere in the world in about 45 minutes with precision accuracy, hypersonic system. That's what we were trying to build. It wasn't necessarily about killing him as it was about making sure he knew we could. So we might change his ways, and he did later. So it was urgent. And my plan was, because my boss told me, top priority, full power of Lockheed is on your side. You have no budget, spend whatever you need. You get to hear that once or twice a year. I'm like, all right. So my
Did you
plan-
record it?
Probably not that smart. By the way, I'm sitting in the bathroom taking this call because I got a brand new baby. Phone rings, dog barks, baby starts crying. I realize I'm talking to this guy I don't even know, so I'm like locked in the bathroom trying to hear him on my phone. Anyway. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna roll up there, I'm gonna scoop up all the drawings, I'm gonna run them back down to the main plant, I'm gonna get, like 1,000 engineers dumped on this thing, we'll figure out what's wrong with the design, we'll fix it. Meanwhile, I'll get this giant manufacturing plant that we have building hardware, because they literally burned up everything we had, set it on fire and melted it. And, we're just gonna power our way through it. So I get up there and we look at this smoking hulk, and I go, okay, where's the drawings? We don't have any drawings yet, we're gonna do the drawings when we were done. Okay, well, that's a problem with my plan. Okay, if I don't have any drawings, I guess I can't fix them, and I guess I can't have anybody else manufacture them. Where's your team? Well, this is it. It was 4 guys. And it was one for each thing, right? We had a double E who built the computer and all the control systems. We made all our harnesses, by the way, and fabricated all of the electronics. We just designed them. We had one guy who did the software. We had this gal who was our mechanical engineer. This thing was a kind of clever device for steering a hypersonic body without any external control surfaces. Pretty cool. And you needed all 4 of these people to do anything, and they were the only 4 you had. So working shifts, which was another part of my plan. I was gonna get 3 shifts on this, we're gonna build all this hardware. Well, I mean, you could probably work these guys 3 shifts for a couple of days, and then they might have to get some sleep. So, your first lesson in leadership there was, well, you don't get to pick your cards. Sometimes you gotta play the hand you are dealt. And so we sat in the corner and I said, okay, my plan sucks. Let's make a plan together. And we did, and we worked every day, 7 days a week, for the next 9 months before we had something we could fly again. And we did, and we flew it a couple of times. It worked. And by that time, I think we played a part. There were other pressures being put on this evil man and caused him to change his ways. Later on, his own people took care of him just a few years ago. But as I look back on it, that was one of the most rewarding experiences I had, because I worked with brilliant people who could get things done and were completely dedicated to this thing.
And here's a word of advice to all of you, to his very first point. If your boss's boss's boss calls and says, go out to the desert and see what you can do, what he's really saying, or what she's really saying, is go out and don't come back unless you fix it. Right?
Yes.
You learned that lesson too, I would imagine. You're probably using that lesson now, I would imagine. So let's roll the tape ahead in the beginnings of United Launch Alliance. I don't know how many of you know the actual beginnings, but there was a time where there were 2 launch companies, the Boeing company, which primarily launched the Delta line of rockets, and Lockheed Martin, which primarily launched the Atlas line of rockets. And somewhere a long time ago, in a very unusual move, the US government decided it didn't want to support or fund 2 different launch companies and 2 different research projects and 2 different investments. And they actually forced the merger, if I can say it that way. You can probably say it better.
You can be direct, and in fact, I'll even be more direct than you were. At that time, there was supposed to be a giant commercial space industry, and everybody in private industry tooled up for that. Big satellite factories were built. Lockheed and Boeing put these 2 rockets together. Big investments were made, and then we started flying them, and then that big giant internet in the sky, if that sounds familiar today, didn't happen. And everybody was losing a ton of money. I was at Lockheed, I wasn't working that program, but my friends were, and they were taking $50–60 million checks to the side of every rocket. And the satellites had big checks taped to them too. So they got to a point where they said, that's it, we're done. can't be continuing to lose money. It wasn't like it was today, where you had all this investment floating around in private equity, capital, and VCs. You had to actually earn a living. And so they decided, both companies, that they were just gonna be done. And the government said, well, I understand that your commercial communications industry didn't happen, but the United States still needs to go to space for exploration, for national security, so no, you're not. You're not done. And they go, oh, we can't make any money. And they said, guess what? You're gonna make a joint venture and jam these two rockets together into one company, so that you have economies of scale, and you're gonna fly for us, whether you like it or not.
It's a little bit like having Coke and Pepsi make a soda together.
Just a little bit, yeah, that feels in the course. And so for a long time, this United Launch Alliance, we call it a joint venture, but I'd like you to understand that there are joint ventures. In fact, the most common joint venture between two big companies involves them teaming on something with their two companies and their two bodies of employees and stuff like that. This wasn't like that. It isn't like that. They created a new company. Everybody who worked at Lockheed and everybody who worked at Boeing had to quit and be rehired by the new company who inherited the rocket IP. And, everything got chosen, right? So one rocket factory, where there were two. One set of pads, one this, one that, one. And they created this new entity. And it flew almost entirely for the government. Very few commercial launches. And for a long time, it was the only U.S. company that could fly missions like that, and therefore it was a monopoly.
And that company was owned 50% by Boeing and 50% by Lockheed, right?
Exactly. Interacting through a board of directors. No employees going back and forth. And by the way, no investment from the owners. Their investment had already been done. And they created those two rockets in the factory.
And part of this deal was neither of those two companies could retain their rockets either, so they had to move all the IP and all the rockets and the people associated with them to the new venture, so that Boeing or Lockheed didn't have an independent launch operation going on, if I'm correct.
That's correct. Yeah. So the Coke Pepsi thing continued through our board of directors. So we were governed by these two competing companies. And by the way, at the space company level. So they competed with everything they did except ULA.
And I understand that the way it works is that the various senior positions are also allocated from company to company.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Lockheed got to appoint the CEO, Boeing got to appoint the COO. There's a CFO, and a thing called a controller that might be more paid to you guys, a similar financial function. And those four positions were picked two and two by the two owners. You still had to quit and get rehired. And then the rest of it was part of the ULA company, hired own people, all of that.
Right, and so then that was also governed for the first 7 or 8 years with something called the consent decree, which essentially was the government saying, we're giving you this monopoly, but we're gonna look over your shoulder for a long period of time to make sure you don't abuse it or don't do it correct. Is that a good way to say that?
It is, and I mean, we're being super transparent here. Northrop Grumman complained and said, I don't know about this. I mean, what if this ULA, because of its ownership and cultural ties to the two owners, give preferential treatment for launching their satellites? That wouldn't be fair, since we're the only company in the country. And so the government said, you're right. So they came to us and said, now we're making you do this, but we're also going to make you do it fairly. And so they levied a thing called a consent decree, which, by the way, we paid for. So when that was still in place, ULA paid all of the government's expenses to have a big staff that watched everything we did to make sure it was always fair and had other technical requirements. Nothing could be co-mingled. I said it's a standalone company. That was also because of the consent decree. You couldn't be on the same IT systems. You couldn't be in the same facility. You couldn't use anything from the owners. You had to be completely fenced off.
So you are the second CEO of United Launch Alliance, and
Yeah.
there was a day where someone picked up the phone call, and maybe you were in your bathroom again, and said, Tory, how would you like to go over and become CEO of ULA? How did that happen?
So the world changed. Michael Gass was the first CEO, did a hell of a job. He put the Hatfields and McCoys together But at the end of that journey, all of a sudden there was a second company that could maybe launch some missions, SpaceX. And so that was an opportunity for the country to have a broader industrial base for launch. Good thing, especially now given the challenges we face with China. And so ULA had to change. It had to transform. And that was what I was asked to come in and do. Take ULA from what the government needed then to what the country needs now, which was a competitive company. Didn't have a RD-180 rocket engine on the first stage manufactured in Russia, which, by the way, ironically, the government said, use that engine. And I said, okay. But then the government said, stop using that engine. And so I had to come in and get rid of that engine and turn the company into what it is now.
I don't know how many of you know that backstory, but there was a negotiation done between the United States and then the Soviet Union, now Russia, to reduce nuclear capacity. And one of the ways to do that was to take away the launch capabilities. And the way that it was done, quite unusual, is that we, the United States, wound up buying a lot of the Russian launch systems, actually brought them over to the United States, put them in storage, I think in Georgia somewhere, maybe Alabama. And they sat there for a while until some person said, well, we've got all these rocket motors out there, let's start using them. And they began to get incorporated into the Atlas line of rockets. Until such time somebody woke up and said, well, you can't do that anymore. But you said we could before, now we can't.
Yeah, and so that, those ran out pretty quick. So they were being manufactured in Russia. And it became about, at the end of the Cold War, not letting Russian rocket scientists run off to North Korea or Iran and keep them employed. So it was a good idea. And it was a good idea through several presidents and several Congresses. Now, of course, as I walk in the door, Senator McCain, God rest him, most powerful man in the U.S. Congress at the time, hated that idea, and he passed a bill that outlawed that. And so I came in August of 2014. The law of the land at that time said that, well, that's the end of Atlas in 2017, therefore ULA goes out of business. And so my mission was to try not to let that happen.
They might have told you that before you took the job on, right?
Yeah, they might.
So maybe, Tory, we could go to, you've got a couple slides of what is ULA today.
Yeah.
You've now been at this for almost 10 years as CEO. You've gone through a lot of pretty challenging situations, getting the company back on its feet. We'll talk about Vulcan in a minute, but maybe you could walk through your slides. I'll turn them on.
Yeah, and I'll tell you guys, since, this is Aero, and you're art students, I figure you're pretty smart, so there's gonna be a little technical stuff. There might be a test later. This is the company kind of on a sheet. Upper left-hand corner, this is the largest rocket factory in the world, at about 2 million square feet. It is growing. It's going to grow by a good 50% over the next 12 months because of the amount of business we want. So that's, the top left is inside. You're looking at the outside at the top right, except that's an older picture because that green you see in the corner is now got buildings on top of it. Below that, that's the rocket ship. These rockets are too big to ship over land. When the thing is put together fully assembled, it's 20 to 30 stories high. But even the first stage is a good 10 to 12 stories high, depending. And so you gotta transport it by water and then assemble it at the pad. So that's what that is. So we've always had this one rocket ship called the rocket ship. It's a customized vessel to transport rockets. Go figure. What's unique about it is, it's a roll-on, roll-off like other cargo ships, but it has very precise control of its draft. So you can go through rivers as we go Ohio, Tennessee, Mississippi, out into the Gulf, and then it can ride properly, get down and handle the ocean, and either go out to Cape Canaveral or go through the Panama Canal up to Vandenberg in California. In the old days, when Mike was running the company, we weren't that busy, so I had it out in Kwajalein Atoll in deep South Pacific one time, bringing me some hardware for a test, so it really can do the open ocean. What you see below it is a rendering. We're building another rocket ship that's bigger to keep up with our business. Below that, pads. I used to have a lot of launch pads because I had 4 different rockets, and together they had about 45 configurations. That's expensive. And part of the reason we had that is because as the only provider, we had to have multiple redundant systems in case one went down, so the US still had access to space. That's a law, assured access. Now there's multiple providers, so I was free to shed all those costs. So where we are today, 2 launch pads, 1 in each coast. This is the kind of appropriate reuse for this kind of rocket, and I'll explain that to you in a minute. That's the technical part of this, but you're looking at about a year ago an orbital demonstration of a really cool re-entry technology that will allow us to bring our booster engines back, which are about 2/3 the cost of the booster, with this inflatable heat shield made out of no burning fabrics. Until that demonstration was done, the hypersonic re-entry shield is a rigid body, carbon, or ceramic, depends on inflation to get back to the atmosphere. And that means it limits the size of everything you can do with it. It has to be bigger than the thing it protects. So it limits the size, for example, of a lander that would re-enter that way at Mars to about the size of Perseverance, can't get any bigger. Now we can take, an SUV to Mars if we want, or I can bring my engines back. And of course, as of the 8th of January, our brand new rocket that replaced all of the other rockets I had and got rid of the RD-180s. By the way, I did have to get the law changed to give me enough time to do that. It was a constant battle with that senator. I never disagreed with him on the need to do this. I disagreed with him on how long it takes to develop a brand new rocket engine, and I felt like I knew something about it. But so did he, for whatever reason. Anyway, so that's that. Go to the next slide. Now we're going to talk a little technical for a minute. When you're a rocket, there's 2 kinds of missions. There's 8 orbits you might go to, but they fall into these 2 buckets, what we call high energy, and what we also then call low energy, or you might think of as LEO operations. So the spacecraft might go somewhere above LEO, but the rocket is done in LEO. So from the rocket's perspective, even a GTO, geosynchronous transfer orbit, is a LEO orbit. An interplanetary mission is a LEO orbit, because that's where the rocket does its job and is finished. And what you're looking at here are the things the rocket has to do and the relative difficulty of them depending on where you're at. So you're at LEO, everything's normalized to 1.0 in LEO. Medium Earth Transfer Orbit, that's where GPS likes to go, and you guys have a connection to that here. The GTO standard, that's a commercial GTO orbit that is defined kind of by mutual agreement in the commercial communications industry so that they can have competition. So it's kind of, think of it as the least common denominator of capability. PO, interplanetary, now we get to GTO enhanced, which is near GTO or super GTO, VO direct inject, and GSO inject. And these bars are all scaled with LEO being 1.0, and stuff like the delta V you got to deliver, how many burns you have to do, how long the coasts are in between burns, and of course how long the whole mission is. And you can see they kind of cleanly fall into these 2 buckets. The only special thing about interplanetary is the tremendous benefits you get from accuracy if you can deliver very high accuracy, is what it means to the spacecraft. The accuracy that we delivered, for example, to the Parker Solar Probe, above and beyond the requirement, if nothing else goes wrong on that probe, will allow it to collect about 3 times the size.
And the Parker Solar Probe is the mission to the sun, the closest mission we've ever gotten to the sun.
So literally flying through the sun's outer atmosphere, if you will. The closest we've been before that is about the Venus orbit. All right, so 2 buckets. Where does everybody else go? They go over here. Why? Because there's a lot of business over here. This is where all the commercial market is. Lots and lots of business. And this rocket's harder to design and riskier and more expensive. So, if you got a board of directors, they're going to tell you to go over here. We're the only guys left over here now with Vulcan. Vulcan's the last high energy rocket. And the reason we did that, 2 reasons. One, national security is still our core, even though the balance in business is now 50-50. That's still, kind of why we're here. And because the first first big opportunity for a large contract that would allow me to save this company after all this very painful business transformation, flattening the company, laying off half my executives, you know, collapsing my supply chain, retiring all these rockets. The last thing I did, I laid off 30% of my employees so that we could get lean and mean and compete and then grow back. The first opportunity I had was a block buy for the government, so I needed to be able to make that and succeed or just close the doors. So those are the two reasons. So go to the next. Let me tell you a little bit about what I said a minute ago when I said this one rocket is riskier and more expensive to design than the other, and they're fundamentally different. And before I go into all these words, I'm going to give you the most obvious difference, and that's the staging ratio. A LEO rocket, or a rocket that operates in low Earth orbit, it's only got to get to LEO. And so that means you are free to burn this first stage out pretty early and use your upper stage to help you get to LEO. It's only a 15-minute ride to LEO. And the duration of the mission is pretty short. I mean, a half-hour-long LEO mission is pretty long, and you'll never see one longer than 45 minutes to an hour. And so you're able to use that upper stage to get you out of the atmosphere, get you to LEO, get you lined up, drop off your satellite. And that'll have implications we'll talk about later. Part of which is how you approach reusability. The high energy rocket, on the other hand, is totally different because the upper stage's job is not to help you get to LEO, it's to take you from LEO to somewhere else. So you want the first stage literally to fly to LEO, and it does. And then, because you're going somewhere else that's maybe 5, 8, 9, even 10 hours away, not an hour away, not 15 minutes away, you're exposed to deep space radiation for 40, 50 times longer. And so you have to have radiation hardened electronics, you have to have the ability to shut down and wake up and still operate and not have gas bubbles, not boil off, and cavitate your engines, not freeze up stuff in weird places. Because as you guys know, Kepler makes you do things in a certain way. You can't just burn any time you want to affect different orbital parameters. A classic example being the direct injected geosynchronous orbit. You get to LEO, you put yourself on that elliptical orbit with its apogee at your desired altitude, usually GSO, that's the most common one. And then you gotta wait till you get there to raise your perigee. You can't effectively do it in between. It's just physics tell you. And so this ends up with a big long list of stuff on the right. And a lot of these are very exotic technologies, like incredible mass fractions that are on the upper stage, because you gotta lift all that stuff up there. And you guys know, almost everything a rocket, any rocket, either one lifts, is its own propellant. Right? And a heavy class launch vehicle payload is never more than 3, maybe 5% of the total mass of the vehicle when you start that thing flying. So it's all about all of that. And the implications that I'll show you in a minute on reuse is that for here, because you are able to use the upper stage to help you reach space, there's not a giant performance impact on a LEO mission to saving half your propellant and the booster to fly it home. So that's the appropriate kind of reuse here. Here, the opposite is true. If you save half your propellant and the booster to fly home with, your performance to a high energy orbit is almost non-existent. And so it's a different kind of reuse, and that's why I showed you the Milburnium inflatable heat shield. Because what we will do is burn out all that propellant, separate the engines, and just recover those. Common reuse. Upper stage is its own thing to be used in space. Go to the next slide. There's only a couple of movies. This is just another way to help you remember this. We're looking at the two classes of rocket again. This is altitude and where you separate. This is only a little bit above X-15 altitude in terms of where you would separate a LEO-optimized rocket. Deep in the atmosphere. And again, remember, you're using your upper stage to help you climb out of the gravity well and reach the LEO orbit. This guy's 2-3 times higher. You're all the way in space with free stage. Which makes it a little bit difficult to fly this thing home. And because of the staging ratio, again, impact. And these are the impacts. So by flying home, you lose a scant 15% to a LEO payload mass nothing. Makes a lot of sense to fly home. Not bad at GTO, 25. Oh, you can't go to GSO at all. Zero mass. Can't even lift your own innerweight there. Over here, it's a little bit different. Starts heavy, 50% at Leo, because you didn't use any of your upper stage hardly at all to go to Leo. The first stage took you all the way to Leo altitude. You don't have Leo velocity, but you have Leo altitude and so on. Next slide. Another way to look at it, to get your sort of head around it, these are not all 8 orbits, but the 4 that kind of bound it. That's your metric tons to orbit. You know, here's your classic typical Leo in a reusable mode. The mass it can take kind of starts petering out at GTO. Nobody has done a direct inject to GSO with this kind of vehicle yet because of that impact performance. There's been a couple of flights. The press is a little careless about it, but they fell short at GSO. Here's Vulcan, which we balance. I'm going to talk in a second about how we cheat the architecture. Because one of the truths in rocket architecture is you have to pick your most common mission or your driving mission. You design your rocket, and it's optimized for that, and that is where it is the most efficient. Yay, I've got a rocket. Your payloads are bigger, they're smaller, orbits you have to go to or near Earth or further away. Tough, you got your rocket. Okay, it performs the way it does. It's an engineered machine optimized for a purpose, which is another way of saying no rocket is the best of everything. That's just childish talk. You guys as engineers know nothing is perfect for everything. You have to pick and you design for that. We cheat a little bit here. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then of course we have an example of a hyper sort of massive Leo lifter specifically designed for things like proliferated Leo constellations and what a rocket like that can do. And of course it's a giant freight train to space. 4 times what we can do on, you know, a Vulcan to Leo. They can't get its own innerweight out of Leo. Unless you have some way of filling it up with propellant atoms there. So that's another way of looking at it. Go to the next slide. Okay, my last slide. So let me talk about how we cheated a little bit on Vulcan. We call it a dial rocket. So Vulcan can have, depending on how you want to count it, 0, 2, 4, 6 solids. That's like having 6 first stages. And it comes with 2 different upper stages. A Leo optimized stage, which counterintuitively, thank you, there they are, you can see the solids. The Leo optimized version of Vulcan has a smaller upper stage, not a bigger one. I want more mass to Leo, I gotta put less rocket on the pad. Anybody know why? Yeah?
Your upper stage is a very low TWR, so you're going to be fighting gravity losses a lot more, so to speak. So you use your first stage and your boosters to get you closer to Leo before you drop off that lower TWR upper stage.
Excellent answer. I'll give you the short version of that. You're already in Leo. You can't use most of the propellant in the upper stage to go to Leo, so it's just dead weight. And yes, thrust to weight ratio matters because when you're going to Leo, you're dominated by overcoming gravity losses. So that's kind of how we cheat, and that's what's allowed us to be the most efficient, and by the way, cheapest rocket for high energy orbits. We get to know what the prices are in government contracts because they get released. We run about 30% lower than our competitor pricing for high energy missions that have been awarded today. But still be able to reach down low enough to grab Kuiper, which was the largest launch contract ever awarded, and is 100% Leo. It's all, you know, Kuiper satellites going to provide high-speed, low-bandwidth latency. Okay, so that's where we are today.
So 2 things I wanted to talk about. One, in our industry, particularly since we've started this commercial side of the industry a couple of decades ago, the term has come out called competimates, where one is sometimes a competitor, sometimes a teammate. And it goes back to what I said about all of you making sure you stay friends with everyone as much as possible, because you never know who you're partnering with. And sometimes those partnerships are for a program and then you're competing the next program. Sometimes they're for a long term. In this case, Tory, I want to maybe talk a little bit about the relationship with Blue Origin and the first stage motor, and how did that come about, and what was the thinking there, and tell us a little bit about, maybe roll into what happened with Vulcan and the performance and what you saw in the first launch.
Sure. Well, the significance of that is Blue Origin also has a vehicle, the New Glenn, that we're heading up will fly later this year, and therefore is a competitor with ULA. But it's also the provider of my first stage engine, the BE4, which is the methane engine. Why you see that beautiful blue sort of trail on Vulcan.
Taking you back to your cattle ranch, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so what's that about? Well, a couple things. First, I was in a big damn hurry when I got to ULA in 2014. Remember, I was supposed to go out of business 3 years later. If I could not get rid of that RD-180 and have a vehicle that would meet all of my requirements, allow me to be affordable, and not have a Russian engine on it. And so I surveyed everybody who had an engine or had an engine in development, who had once sketched an engine on a cocktail napkin. They all came here, or we went there, and we talked to everybody. And I even had, at one point, my most promisingly was a Ukrainian engine. And the other half of this equation is I had to be able to afford the development of this, so I had to have a partner. All of my suppliers had invested in Vulcan, big time, hundreds of millions of dollars, in some case billions of dollars. So I had to make both things happen. That's the hard part about being a CEO and being a chief engineer. The Ukrainians, by the way, they were going to pay for the whole thing. It was awesome. It even happened to be a methane engine. It was called Guardian. It was kind of halfway through development. I'm like getting all liquored up. And remember, the reason McCain hated Russian engines is because Russia had already invaded Ukraine and taken Crimea from them. And at this time, they were already, out there with Donbass grabbing territory. So I run back to my office after they left, and I go, where the hell are these guys? So I Google them and I find out where their factory really is, and I bring it up on the map, and it's 43 miles from the current combat border, the front lines between Russia. And I'm like, great, I'm gonna pick these guys, and 3 months from now, they're gonna be inside Russia. So they were off the table. And so as we went through that process, that's literally how we ended up with the BE4. It was well in development, very close to our requirements. They were willing to make an adjustment to their specs. They were willing to partner on the investment. And if everything went exactly right, I could get it on time. They signed up for 2 years earlier, and I thought they could do it. So I planned the whole program for them to be 2 years late. They were more like 3.5 years late. But we got off a couple weeks ago.
So tell us, well, on that point, before we go into the launch, again, on a competitive story, who's the owner of Kuiper?
Amazon. Yeah.
Which makes life interesting as well, right?
Yeah, well, he's retired. You're talking about Jeff.
Yeah.
He is retired. He's still on their board.
No, of course, I
Well,
was
who's
saying it tongue in cheek, but the idea is that Amazon chose United Launch Alliance for the flights and was competing, in effect, with Blue Origin, which was started by Jeff Bezos in doing that. So it's a very interesting circle that we sometimes live in.
Yes, it is. And, I probably should have pointed out that New Glenn and Vulcan are differentiated in the marketplace. Remember that low energy, high energy? New Glen's a low energy rocket. And yes, everything you said is true. It's also true is Vulcan's flying. And the other two companies were also getting contracts. The other two being Ariane 6 in Europe, and the French, and of course New Glenn. Small contracts, kind of spreading the risk around, having a commercial version of assured access, as the commercial industry often does. And that was probably a wise choice. You might have noted that they also had to put a launch on SpaceX, not because of Vulcan, but because those programs are delayed a little bit more. And when you're doing one of these low latency systems, you need a certain amount of satellites on orbit in order to have service. So there's like good news and bad news with LEO. It's the good news that it's a distributed network and it's not very sensitive to the loss of 1 or 5 or 10 or 100 spacecraft. But you need to have about 70% of it on orbit before it works at all.
At least 70%. I was involved with one where we had to get into the 80s before that system could be turned on.
It was around 85, if I remember.
So you talked a little bit about your first involvement with a program at Lockheed with a missile. Tell us about what it felt like on the pad in the control room, looking at your new rocket, pressing the button and saying, go.
Yeah. So, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. This was a culmination of 9 years of really difficult business transformation, some really tough politics to get people to trust us with enough time to get this done. Very aggressive competitor, by the way, every year, somewhere inside one of the bills would be, a fatal shot to us. If this little clause leaked through, ULA is prohibited from doing business. So tough environment. At the same time, developing a new space launch vehicle, which you get to do about every 2 decades or so. Really tough job, doesn't come around very often. So all of that's going on, and it all comes to land on a 40-minute, well, in this case, this was the first window, so we literally had a 15-minute launch window. It either works or it blows up, and if it was not a successful flight, that would have been a pretty big blow to us. I don't know that we would have necessarily gone broke, but it would have been pretty bad. So it was terrifying. I was telling Mark, I've done about 400 launches. I can tell you guys, it never gets old. It never gets complacent. I get butterflies every single time. Not every one of my launches has had a success, so I don't have to imagine what a rocket failure looks like. I've seen it. I've also gotten the opportunity to manage the 3 most successful rockets in history, but still. So I was terrified, but looking as calm as I could. It doesn't do me any good to scare everybody around you.
That is one of the skill sets when you learn your management. How do you not let your face show what's in your stomach? Because it's one of those things that everybody looks at him as, is he nervous? Is he worried?
Everybody's watching you, so you gotta look like supremely confident, serene. And at one point, I was convinced my headset was busted, because there's just nothing going on. I mean, when you launch a big, liquid fueled rocket like this in this class, there's always stuff going on. I mean, people are on console 12 hours ahead of time, you're testing, you're conditioning, you're preparing the thermodynamic state of the propellants, your fueling is super complicated, and there's always something being worked. There's an ice ball in the billet room, there's a thermocouple that's dead, there's a vacuum jacketed line that's leaking, and you're trying to adjust a regulator and increase pressure and compensate. There's a lot of stuff happening. And after about 25 minutes of zero talking in the net, I'm like, hey, where's my chief of staff, Maddie? There she's, Maddie, go find IT, my headset's busted. And you come in and go, no, Tory, there's just nothing happening. Literally nothing going on. Oh, wow, okay. A little while later, there was, I'll give you guys an inside scoop. There was, we were concerned, I won't say concerned. The flight termination system has redundancy. It's one of the few things on a rocket that does, unlike a satellite. Got 2 batteries. One of the batteries is right where it's supposed to be. The other battery's a little hot. It's not out of spec or anything, it's just a little hot. And so we tortured that for about 30 minutes because my engineering team was bored. And that was about it. And we just kind of marched through the count, and the window opened, and we went on the first section. And cleanest countdown I've ever been in. The flight was dead nominal throughout. We delivered Peregrine with just a pinpoint accurate insertion. We are also the most accurate insertion company on the planet by far. I can tell you now that we've been through most of the data, not all of it. We won't be done going through data until probably the end of February if you get that much. And some of it you have to wait to get, because it's transmitted to ships at sea. They have to bring it back to you. Literally one observation. The propellant in the first stage, the fuel, the methane, there's a big long feed tube that dumps it into the engine. The last little bit in that feed tube near the end of the burn, it's kind of a burn. It was warmer than we modeled. So because of that, we left the run box, and so we terminated the first stage flight about 1.2 seconds. No big deal. Upper stage makes it up. I mean, that's well within a sigma. That was like 7/10 of a sigma. And of course, on your first rocket, where'd you get your sigma from? Monte Carlos. So we don't really want to fly. So that was it. I've never had a launch this clean. This was like the 90th Atlas, not the first Vulcan. I'm still astounded by that. And knocking on wood, this can be that way every time.
Well, Tory, there's no better way to end your part of the talk than on that note. It doesn't get better than that. Maybe if you have a few minutes, we take a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure.
Just a few, please, go ahead.
So, you started your career doing mainly engineering stuff, and you slowly transitioned more into business. You know, CEO is more business than engineering, at least in my perspective. At one point
You'd
in
be
your life,
surprised. So if you're in a bank, or you're in a retail company, or you're in a trucking company, it's all about financials and business arrangements and stuff like that. If you're in this industry, it's not like that at all. I make engineering decisions every day. You know, at the beginning of every one of these trades in that rocket, there's not necessarily always a clear choice, and somebody has to decide. It isn't black and white. Guess who has to do that? I have to do that. The architecture you saw was my choice, and then the team can go to work from there. So you'd be surprised how technical management jobs are in the aerospace industry.
if you were to put myself in a position of a CEO, I don't think I do very well. So my question is, like, at what point in your life did you feel like you gained the expertise to be in such a position, and where did you gain that expertise from?
Yeah, no, I have a very traditional aerospace career. It's been 10 years in a pure technical role, building deep expertise in solid propulsion. And I was a ballistician. I modeled solid propellant rocket motors. I designed them. I did a lot of work in ordnance and mechanical control systems. If you look at the Trident missile, it's got this funny pointy thing on the end. I also designed the aerospike, the aerodynamic spike that's on it. It's a designer, yes. When I finally decided it would be okay to be a lead, it was still a purely technical job. So the first leadership role in engineering management, typically, you're doing your work, and then you're coordinating the efforts of 3 or 4 other people on top of that. So you do a little less so that you have time to do that. And then after that, I was a manager in the propulsion group. So finally, I had some budget responsibility and a little bit more pressure on me for schedules, but still making technical decisions, not doing analysis myself. And then from that point forward, it's program management at a level of complexity and magnitude that you can handle, systems engineering, a little bit more complexity, back to program management, and you're laddering boom, 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 until I ended up as chief engineer of a major program with like 500 engineers working for me and a big budget. And then I went from that job, which was my dream job that I wanted to have and retire in, and unfortunately got a little bit too early, and was asked to be the vice president of engineering for Lockheed Martin Space Company. And kind of a funny story, because I get called into my boss's office. He says, "There's somebody on the phone that wants to talk to you." I take the phone, and it's the president of space, and he says, "Tory, and I really, we're going to stand up an overall engineering organization, because the company was divided into 3 divisions. Satellites were separate from rockets, separate from marine systems, believe it or not. And we want to have one big engineering team, and I want you to run it." And I said, "Wow, that's really flattering, Tony. Is it okay if I think about this and I talk to my wife?" Because it caught me completely off guard. He said, "Oh, of course." He was such a gentleman. He was like everybody's grandfather. He says, "Oh, that's completely okay. I understand. Just call me back tomorrow." And so I hang up and I look up, and Steve, my boss, is like, "He's right here." Like his nose is on my nose. He goes, "What the fuck are you doing?" Call him back right now and accept the job. Okay. So And went from that to being vice president local program manager on a big development program for this defense interceptor. And business was kind of like a company. And had a couple of those. And thought I'd retire in that job. Thought I was doing very important work for the country. Completely content. Bought the house I thought I would retire in. And kids were off of college. And 2 engineers by the way. I like to say 2.5. My son's a mechanical engineer. My daughter's a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, and she just finished her additive manufacturing degree at Penn State. So I think she counts as like at least 1.5. And then I got sent to ULA, where I've been now for 9 years.
Yeah.
So you talked a bit about your relationship working with Congress, and when I think about politicians and working in rocketry, I often think about the worst case scenario of like the space launch system, which is now like billions of dollars per launch. So how do you balance the engineering when you're working with politicians and the politics of the situation?
Yeah, sure. So a couple things. First, I have a secret superpower. I can communicate engineering and rocketry things to people without a technical background. Congress people, senators don't have that, and their staffers don't typically have that kind of background. And they cover a gigantic spread of responsibilities of which this is only one. So you can't believe something if you can't understand it. So communication is key. The other thing is I play the long game with stakeholders like that. And what I mean by that is, you can go in, and most executives and lobbyists they hire will go into a congressional office and lobby. They want something, and they're going to ask for it, and they're going to argue for it, and you're just you're going to maybe be a little biased in how they talk about it. And I've always felt that because of the importance of the work that we do, that for my stuff there was really no place for that. I would want to go in and be honest and fair and honest broker, we say in the industry, and build credibility slowly over time, because they don't believe you the first time. They got to get to know you over the span of months or years. They've got to have heard you say, well, my competitor's actually better at this than I am, or I'm better at something else. And find out that that's true, so that they trust you. It's all about that trust, and about them having that trust, both because they can understand what you're telling them, but also because you've been honest and you know it. And you know that you're sincere in what you want to happen. The way I look at the relationship between the private industry and the government, it's the power of our American system. It's why we will overcome the aggression and the challenge that we're facing now from China. Because we have the government infrastructure with a clear mission, and we have industry with innovation and capital and smart people to invent things to solve problems that we have to invent for to overcome superior numbers from other challenging nations. And therefore, we both have a role to play. My job is serving the nation. And in order to serve the nation effectively, I need to run a successful business. If I can't deliver product and make sales and make some money at it so that I have money for R&D, I'm not helping the country. So it's all one thing to me. And I'm not shy about saying that, and that's the reputation that I have in the government. I will always try and do the right thing. And they might not agree with me on what the right thing is, but they know I'm going to try my best to do what's right.
Let's take a couple more.
So, kind of speaking back about your Vulcan's launch capabilities, I know it has, like you said, had a very large contract with Kuiper. What do you think makes Vulcan more effective at delivering, or I guess just effective at delivering on Kuiper's needs over something like a SpaceX like a Falcon 9?
First off, those are direct competitors, Kuiper and Starlink. So I don't know what Amazon thinks. I'll tell you what I would think. I would think that if I'm putting profit into the pocket of my direct competitor, can say, obviously, that that very busy launch schedule that SpaceX has is mostly Starlink. And if I wanted to get a bunch of launches done, I'd be worried about jamming into that manifest. I'd certainly be worried about who would have priority on any given day or any given mission, and there are challenges. I can tell you that Vulcan carries a pretty heavy load. We can do 45 Kuipers to orbit, which is a lot. Even some of the LEO optimized vehicles like New Glenn don't carry that many more. And of course, the driving economic parameter is dollar per spacecraft in orbit. We're very competitive. We achieve that with that dial rocket. And by the way, the LEO optimized Centaur wasn't part of the original architecture. That was a pivot. When the Kuiper opportunity appeared, we said, well, how can we be more effective? How do we drive that dollar per spacecraft on orbit down? And, the most powerful way is to carry more spacecraft. It's conversely, or counterintuitively, it is not to make the rocket cheaper. That's number two. Number one thing you do is get a lot of them up there, because that's, that's in the denominator. And so we introduced that. We did it with agility. We did it in a clever way. We don't get outside and mess with it. My competitor pulls in about $2 billion of external cash every year. I don't have any of that. We live by our own efforts. All the R&D we have, we derive from profits. So we're pretty scrappy about that. We have to change this. Well, then leave it alone. Change the things that make a difference in the architecture. And get your supplier partners to invest in their components with us. Thank you.
You mentioned that data would be done for like
Yeah.
So when can we expect the next Vulcan launch? That's VJ's next, right?
Yeah.
And when can we expect to see smart vehicles? I'm kind of have to say that.
Yeah. So, two questions. I'll do the first one first. As soon as you guys are ready. It's not yours anymore.
No, it's not.
It
It is emotional.
It still is.
We actually made the deal to put Dream Chaser on Vulcan a number of years ago now, before it was even flying. So that was the confidence I thought.
So, I think they're going to come out successfully at Pembroke, maybe about Q2. Do I have a backup customer if something happens and they need one? For sure. So still about that same time. We're looking to fly, I don't know, 4 or 5 depending on spacecraft availability this year, counting what we've already done. Oh, there's a second question. What was it? I forgot.
When can we see smart vehicles? When is
Oh,
that?
yeah. So, we are busily working on that. And actually, Amazon is, I'll say, is the first beneficiary of it. And we work pretty closely with them on that. It's kind of built into the contract. I can't go into the structure of that, obviously. That's all proprietary. But it's a combination of when we can be confident enough to reuse it. You'll see demonstrations. You'll see more orbital demonstrations. You'll even see engines brought back but not reused. But we also need to synchronize with their needs to have their constellation populated to the degree that they require to make their goals. Because it costs a fuse and a satellite. It adds weight. Anytime you put anything on a rocket, you're taking something off the payload. And the way to think about reuse, whether it's component reuse like we're going to do, or propulsive flyback reuse like the other guys do, you start with an expendable rocket and you add things to it to make it able to do that.
Take 2 more.
Okay. Hi, Tory. Thanks again for coming to Boulder and having my intimate and having a conversation with us. This has been great. Obviously, you've given us a lot of personal advice here. This is really informative, fun bunch. If you're willing, the best you can, share us about where your personal career is headed after this. What's after the day looks like there.
So, I give much better advice than I follow. So you should have a career plan. You should be looking as far into your future as you are comfortable looking. That's for some people, that's all the way out in 30 years. For other people, it's 3 to 5. Doesn't matter. Have a plan to get there. What's the kind of job I want? What is the perfect resume for that job? What have I got? What's the gap? And you go find ways to fill that. And never done that, I just kind of stumbled into all these roles. Other people were managing my career for me, and I just didn't know. Where I am here, I'm still feeling like I'm contributing, which is the most important thing to me, so I plan to keep working. And I'm very happy at ULA, so I don't have any plans to retire or any plans to like enter the automotive industry or anything.
He's gonna take my job next.
I think you're doing a pretty good job here with the job you got, so I would have to go somewhere that doesn't have me.
Okay, we'll finish up.
So I know you talked a lot about how competitors shape kind of the landscape that you're in right now. What do you think you learned from your competitors, and what do you think they should learn from you, or what they have learned?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think my primary competitor does very well is, I'll say two things. First, they're pretty creative on finding low-cost infrastructure. They're not above, buying a used pressure vessel with a propeller, stuff like that. And those are things that the traditional aerospace industry just didn't even think about. The real mastery that I would say they have is first to market. And so there's a little bit of a dynamic tension always on what you're trying to get done. So the throw something out there that has some usability that somebody's willing to pay for can be done pretty quickly. And certainly being willing to fly, fail, blow shit up, fix it is absolutely, because I've done it both ways, by the way, is absolutely the fastest way to fly first. Now the flip side of that coin is, your actual ultimate objectives, the requirements you truly need for whatever that whole mission set is. That's the slowest way. You get first to market, you get something working right away. But the fly, fail, fix takes longer to get to the ultimate total capability, doing it through a disciplined sort of system engineering process. And people were very surprised that we had a perfect mission on our first flight. I'd say the other guys had sort of conditioned the environment to expect 3 to 4 explosions before you got a non-explosion, and God knows how many flights before it actually does everything it's supposed to do. This did everything it's supposed to do the first time, and it's faster to that, not the first to fly. So there's a balance there, and there's an appropriate time when you need to get something out there right away, even if it's not ultimately, finally. So I admire your ability to do that.
Well, Tory, on behalf of all of us at CU, thank you for coming out and generously spending your time with us and the very open discussion that you had. I think everyone here really benefited, not just from what you said, but from the way you said it and from the honesty that you put behind it. It really is our pleasure to have you here, and we've certainly all learned a lot for doing that, so thank you very much. Finish up by saying that these guys are right on the other side of Denver. It's a wonderful place to work, so when you're looking for career choices, please look at what they have to offer. I think it would really be marvelous to see more and more CU people as part of ULA. So Tory, thank you very much, and don't forget to pick up something on the way out the door.